Alright, so today we have a battery isolator, and this one is used, so obviously we're going to have to test it and make sure that it works properly before we go ahead and install it in a vehicle. Now this came out of an old F-250, and the vehicle is being scrapped, so we thought we'd pull out a few things that could be useful on future vehicles. So basically, if you're not familiar with battery isolators, I've drawn up a little diagram for you. So here's your alternator. And on a normal car, without an isolator, all you have is this side, where the power from the alternator comes down to the battery, down to the starter motor. Obviously you got a solenoid and stuff in there. Goes to the fuse block, to the wiring harness, and powers all your accessories and all that fun stuff. Now with the battery isolator, it's an additional feed that the alternator goes to the isolator. The isolator has one terminal that goes to the positive side of your regular battery, and another terminal that goes to the positive side of a different battery. So these two circuits are completely separated. Now, instead of just taking this positive wire and splitting it off to this battery and this battery, what the isolator does is it has one-way diodes between these two terminals and these two terminals, and it allows power to only flow one way. So these two circuits are never in contact with each other. They're completely separated. I have one in my truck, and I could run all my accessories off the back. I can run my lights, I can run whatever I want to, and I can leave that going for as long as I want. If this battery runs down and eventually dies, if I leave it out for too long or whatever, the car will still start, everything on the vehicle will still work. I won't have any issues with that. If this battery gets too low, if I leave my headlights or something on, I can actually jump it to this battery and basically jump my own vehicle. So it's a great system, there's many advantages to it, but on a typical four-door passenger car that you drive around to college or whatever, you won't really need anything like this. I drive a utility vehicle and obviously have a use for it. So anyways, now that we've covered that the battery isolator basically splits off the power into two completely separate circuits, I'm going to show you how to test one. So as you can see from this diagram, this top post here in the triangle goes to the alternator. One goes to your positive of your main car battery, one goes to the positive of your additional battery. Now to test these is really super simple. As you can see on here, it actually has a little diagram. It says alternator, auxiliary, and main battery. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn our multimeter to the little symbol that's basically an arrow with a line through it. That one right there. The other one with the speaker symbol is continuity, and we're basically testing for the same thing. But we're diode testing it right now, is what we're doing. So since I have one hand and I'm filming with one hand, I have taken the negative just on a jumper so it can hold itself and put it on the post that goes to the main battery. I'll take my positive and touch it to the first terminal where the alternator is supposed to hook up, and we should get a reading. Off. If I touch it again, we get a reading. So now we can see that power is flowing from this terminal to this terminal. Now we'll try it, same thing, except this one goes to the auxiliary battery. We'll see if power can flow from this terminal to this terminal. We'll touch it on there, and we get a reading. So that's good. If I release it, it drops. If I touch it again, we get a reading. Now, instead of just hooking up all three together, since they're positive wires, what this isolator does is it has one-way diodes that directs the flow and it basically keeps these isolated from each other, so this circuit and this circuit don't touch. How we test for those is we actually put the negative lead on the alternator side of it, and what we're looking for here is when we touch either side post, we should not be able to get a reading. If the diodes are functioning properly, there should not be any electricity flowing from this post that direction. We should not get any any power going from either battery towards the alternator side of it. So when I touch this post and we look at the multimeter, we get nothing. When I touch this post and we look at the multimeter, we get nothing again. So we know that this isolator is functioning properly and it can be installed. Just one more time to the main battery. Now we're testing positive, the flow going from the alternator side to the battery side. If I touch it, we get a reading. We'll test the auxiliary port from the alternator to the auxiliary battery. If I touch it, we get a reading. So this battery isolator is functioning properly and can be installed. And it's real simple. That's how they work. That's how to test them. Obviously, they ground off through the heat shrink here. This whole outside is basically fins and flaps. That is a heat shrink. Very smooth to me. But anyways, one other thing to note is since you do have diodes in here, they are slightly restrictive and there will be a slight voltage drop. So take into account for that. Make sure your alternator is powerful enough to keep both batteries charged. Make sure you're not running anything too low because if you're putting twice the load on the alternator, obviously if it's not up for the task, it's not going to do the job. So you may have to upgrade your alternator to something else if you're going to set up an isolator. But other than that, there's really not much else to it. So hope you learned something and hope you can get out there and do it yourself.